Here we go. You're watching episode 3 of Q&A with Coach. I'm your host, Jason Fitzgerald, and today we are going to talk about how to stay warm in your starting corral of your next race, the time that you should take between your warm-up and the start of the race, and your pacing strategies for the trails. And I do have to warn you that I've had a little bit of caffeine today, so I'm feeling especially jacked up. But I'm also going to switch the script a little bit, and I'm going to ask you a question at the end of this episode. So make sure you watch through to the end. Okay, our first question is from Chris, and he wants to know, how do you stay warm in your corral? And this is a big problem for a lot of runners, especially those who are running big races. The New York City Marathon just happened recently. The Philadelphia Marathon is coming up. Chicago just happened. And in any big marathon like this, your starting corral is going to be pretty crowded. I ran into this problem myself earlier this year when I ran the Boston Marathon. As soon as you get into that starting corral, people just keep flooding in, and soon there's not a lot of room around you to do any kind of warm-up exercises, dynamic stretching, or anything like that. So what do you do with limited space before your race in terms of a warm-up? Well, there's a couple things that you can do, and neither of them are any kind of groundbreaking or earth-shattering new and sexy ways to stay warm before a race. But here's what you can do. Before you get into your corral, so likely anywhere from 15 minutes to 30 minutes before the race actually starts, and you have more room, do as many exercises as you can. The ones that take up a little bit more space. I'm thinking about Iron Cross, Scorpion, and exercises where you're laying on the ground and you're doing a lot of exercises where your legs are moving back and forth, and you generally need a lot of space to do that. So doing those kind of exercises before you get into the corral is the first thing to do. The second thing to do is when you get into the corral, try to do as many of the standing exercises as you can. Typically, you're going to be able to do the lunge matrix, which is a Coach Jay Johnson a series of exercises that help you get prepared to run. And you should be able to get off to the side and do some leg swings, both front and side leg swings. And if you're running a race where there is a big corral, it's probably going to be a half marathon or a marathon. And as the longer the race becomes and necessarily the pace gets slower, the less important it is to really warm up beforehand. Now, of course, that doesn't mean you don't have to warm up. Yes, you do have to warm up, but you don't have to do as much warm-up activity before a longer race. And that's why you'll see many runners not doing any running before a marathon or even during an ultramarathon beforehand. There's really no warm-up. So I do want to advise you to do the floor exercises before you get into the corral. And then when you do get into the corral, try the standing exercises. Those are the best. Now, I also want to talk about people who think that you could just warm up during the first mile, right? That's what the first mile is for. Yes and no. Yes, you should run slightly slower than goal pace for the first mile of a marathon, and maybe right on goal pace for the first mile of a half marathon. This does help you warm up, and it's much more beneficial to be at or slower than goal pace for a longer race like that than it is to be faster, okay? No race can be won in the first couple minutes, but it certainly can be lost if you go out too hard. So if you take those strategies and you implement them during your race, that is going to be a much better way to stay warm. It's going to be effective, and you're going to see some results in your next race. All right, question number 2 comes from Kira, and she wants to know, is it okay if my pace is a lot slower on the trails as opposed to road running? Yes, that's totally fine. Trail running slower, that's just part of the game. You're going to have uneven terrain. The surface itself is likely going to be a lot softer than the road or a track, so you're not going to get the same kind of energy return, so you're going to run slower. I mean, there's roots, there's rocks, there's hills, there's a lot of things that you don't encounter on the roads that you do on the trails. So you're going to be a lot slower. Now, just to use a quick example, my normal running pace is usually somewhere around 7 minutes per mile. However, if I'm on a difficult trail, and especially now that I'm in Colorado, I'm doing some runs here at altitude, my running pace is closer to 8 minutes now. So we're talking an entire minute per mile slower. You just have to kind of roll with the punches and just run the terrain. If it's smooth, flat, and maybe slightly downhill, you can pick it up and run closer to your normal running pace. But if you're running any kind of technical terrain with hills, you're just going to be slower. It's much more important to go by effort on those kinds of trail runs than it is to really worry about your splits and your overall pace. Just run by effort and you'll still get in pretty much the same workout. Okay, our third question is a good one. This one comes from Melly, and I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name correctly, but she wants to know, how can I get my sprint triathlon 5K time to under 30 minutes? Or just 5K under 30 in general. Running is my weakest event. Now, this is a really difficult, it's an interesting question, but it's also a very difficult question to answer because I'm not really sure what your training currently looks like. If you're a triathlete, you're probably doing at least one longer ride per week. I would also advise you to do a long run as well. It doesn't have to be too long if you're only doing sprint triathlons. Somewhere between 8 and 12 miles is probably plenty. But if you're not doing a long run, then I would definitely start doing that. The other way to really make sure that you're improving your 5K time, whether or not you're a triathlete or simply just a runner, is to make sure that the workouts that you're doing are specific to the event that you're training for. So if you're doing a 5K, and let's just say your goal time is roughly 9:30 per mile, you should practice running 9:30 per mile and faster during the week. So you could be doing some workouts like some fartlek running where you're doing longer intervals of maybe 3 to 5 minutes at length, and you could be doing those at or near your 5K goal pace. And then you should also throw on some shorter repetitions at a much faster pace. So maybe you do a few 30-second to 1 minute reps at 9-minute pace or even 8:30 pace. And because the reps are short, that faster pace shouldn't be a big problem for you. But if you're not working on your endurance with a long run and working on your race-specific fitness with a workout that's geared toward the 5K, then you're not going to see your 5K improve by a lot. Okay, so you need to combine both of those. You need to attack the problem from two angles, from your endurance and also from a more speed-oriented perspective. And so doing that is going to help you see the results not only in improved 5K performances, but I'd also probably say that your bike time may also improve in your triathlon. So that's a really interesting question. Another thing that I would also add is if you're not also just working on a few short but very fast types of running, then that's something that you could also add to your training. So the two things that I would recommend are, first of all, strides. I think every runner should be running strides. It doesn't matter if you're training for the mile or a 100-mile race. You got to be doing strides. These are about 20-second accelerations where you build to about 98% or so of your max speed. You only hold that for about 2 seconds, and then you gradually coast to a stop. It's about 100 meters in total length, and these should be considered fun. It's not a hard workout. Yes, you're running fast, but you're only doing it for a very short period of time, and you're going to have a lot of fun doing it. It's almost like a big dynamic stretch after you finish a run. And I will include in the show notes underneath this video on strength running a link to an article that explains exactly how to do strides. And I'm also going to do that for hill sprints, which is another way that you can really work on running very, very fast. And hill sprints are 8 to 10-second repetitions up a very steep hill. And you should be doing these at 100% max effort. This should be sprinting as fast as you can. Now, this type of workout, after 1 or 2 sessions and you get used to it, It's great for injury prevention. It's great for recruiting all of your muscle fibers in your legs, or as many of them as possible, because you're working against gravity. You're running as fast as you can. So it really does help make your legs a lot stronger and more resistant to injuries. And also it really works on improving your running form. It reinforces very good biomechanics and running form. And it also helps you develop more top-end speed. So I'm going to include a link to that under the video. So if you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you head on over to the strength training site. Great question, and I hope that you improve your 5K soon. Okay, here we go. Final question for today's episode of Q&A with Coach. This one comes from Dave, and he wants to know, is there an optimal time between the end of your warm-up and the start of your race? Now, we talked a little bit in the first part of this episode about how to stay warm in your corral, and you could do some exercises outside of the corral, and then you could do the standing exercises, which typically take less room in the corral. So in an ideal situation, let's pretend you're not in a corral. The ideal situation is that you would do a dynamic warm-up, then you would do your easy running warm-up, then you would do some strides to get ready for the race, and then the race would start a minute or two later. So there really should be as little time as possible from the end of your total warm-up to the beginning of the race. Because when the race starts, let's say you're running a 5K, 5K pace is challenging. It's very fast, it's hard. So you want to make sure that your heart rate is already elevated at the start. You want to make sure that you're perspiring, your legs are loose, and if you get ready and you warm up and you do running and some strides and you're totally ready to run hard, and then you sit there for 10 minutes, your heart rate's going to come down, your muscles are going to tighten up a little bit, and you're simply not going to be as ready to start that race as well as you could, as if your warm-up concluded just a minute or two before the gun of the race. So my recommendation is to try to plan your warm-up as closely as possible. And this is why it's super important to get to the race ahead of time, so that you can make sure that you drop your bag off, your number is on, your shoes are tied. What I like to do is, if the race starts at, let's say, 8 a.m., I like to do a 3-mile warm-up, which for me takes a little over 20 minutes, and I like to start that around 7:25 a.m. I will be done around, let's just say, 7:48. I will change into my racing flats, and then I will start doing my strides. I'll do probably 6 strides, and then at that time it'll be, probably about 7:57. At that time, I can do 1 or 2 extra strides. I'll keep them relatively easy at that point. I won't be running them super fast, but it's just to keep my heart rate up, just to keep me ready to go. And then I'll get on the line, and the race will start soon thereafter. So that's kind of an example of how you would structure your warm-up before a race that starts at 8 a.m. There's obviously challenges with races that start, big marathons where you need to walk a half a mile to the corral, and then once you get in the corral, it's freezing and you have to throw clothes away. There's a lot of challenges there. But in an ideal world, you would do it very close to the start of the race. And it's always important to remember that the shorter and faster the race, the more you have to warm up. So the more you have to run, the more strides that you have to do. Your dynamic warm-up, which includes some dynamic stretching and light strength exercises, that should be slightly longer than if you were doing let's say a marathon. So really take that into consideration. Make sure you get to the race early and do your warm-up as soon as close to the race start as possible, because ultimately if your heart rate is really low, if it's at your resting heart rate, and you stop sweating and you're getting cold and your muscles are starting to get tight, you're not going to run well in that first mile of the race. And so with a short race, where you have to start pretty fast right to begin with, that can be very problematic, and you're not going to feel good coming off the line. Okay, the final thing that I'll say about warming up before a race is that if you're not able to warm up appropriately, or if there's too much time in between your warm-up and the start of the race, it's more important to start that race a little bit slower, okay? Because your heart rate is low, because your muscles have gotten a little bit tighter, you really need to make sure that you use the first couple minutes of the race to help yourself get into a good rhythm. So don't fly off the starting line like gangbusters if you haven't warmed up that well, or you're warmed up really well, but it was 20 minutes ago and now you're freezing. So make sure that you take those first couple minutes, anywhere from 3 to 7 minutes, roughly, and really warm up and help yourself get into your goal pace before you start, running at your goal pace. And it can be a really helpful thing to start a little bit slower, especially in a longer race, but it does depend. Okay, there we go. That is episode 3 of Q&A with Coach. I had a blast answering all your questions today. Now, I promised you that I would ask you a question at the end of this episode. So I want to know, how can I make this show better? How can I improve Q&A with Coach to make it more informative, more entertaining, more helpful to you as a runner? I'm trying to get to as many of your questions as possible, so if you could leave a comment under this video on strengthrunning.com, that would be super helpful for me. And just tell me, give me some, constructive criticism. How can I make this a show that you would love to tune into all the time whenever I put it out? Because I want to make sure that you are getting as much value from this show as possible. Now, if I haven't gotten to your question yet, just tweet it to me again. I can't get to every single question as timely as I wish that I could, but keep tweeting me your questions. I'm on Twitter at JasonFitz1, and make sure you use the hashtag #RunQuestion. And I keep a database of these questions, and I'm going to try to get to them all as soon as possible. Thanks again for watching episode 3 of Q&A with Coach, and I hope to see you next time.